This is the autobiography of Tom Bailey. Photograph by Olivia Bailey when she was 14. Now on with the reading. Have drum, will travel. It's always been interesting to me how a story starts and how it ends. Biographies and autobiographies always held my attention because I was fascinated to know that what I was reading really happened. I realized some of the facts may be altered or embellished when being retold. Perhaps a good writer uses creative license at the cost of not automatically capturing the exact accurate account of their lives or the bio of others. However, it is no fairy tale. My oldest daughter, Kiri, always seems to refer to the world of make believe, with its dragons and elves, magic and marvel. My younger daughters, Abby, Maddie, and Olivia, request that I tell them stories off the top of my head, which are often whimsical and lack any true facts at all. My son Alex could weave words with such deep, colorful emotion that you could chew on it for days and still be digesting what was said years later. Although I pretend and elaborate or embellish the truth, I'm still inclined to at least offer a metaphorical reason or rationale to what every story I'm reading or writing. I thought a great deal about this autobiography, and I came across this psalm, this prayer, to encourage me to get it done. It was Psalm 71, verses 15 through 18, the New Living Translation. This is also my prayer. It reads, I will tell everyone about your righteousness. All day long I will proclaim your saving power. Though I am not skilled with words, I will praise your mighty deeds, O sovereign Lord. I will tell everyone that you alone are just. O God, you have taught me from my earliest childhood, and I constantly tell others the wonderful things you do. Now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me, O God. Let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me. And that is from Psalm 71, verses 15 through 18, the New Living Translation. So, how do I begin? Not even when or where, but how? Well, when I was 8 years old, I recall a teacher encouraging all of us to write a journal. She inspired us to write anything. And when we didn't know what to write, to simply write down what was around us, taking place at that very moment, or our perspective of what we were experiencing, looking forward to, or about things that took place in our past experiences. This is where my story begins, in the past, as far back as I can remember. Side note, I have a bookshelf full of my personal journals from the very first one when I was 8 up to the present. And even while writing this, I'm inclined to question myself and hear statements of discouraging voices only I can hear in my head. They say, no one wants to read that. You don't know how to write well. You don't even read well. If you write it, it won't come out correctly. It's a waste of time. To myself, I say the opposite. I flip every discouraging thought and statement around. Someone wants to read that. You know how to write. You know how to write well. You read fine. If you write it, it will come out correctly. It's not a waste of time. The reality is, writing is a very good way for me to document, process, and share my life. It doesn't really matter who reads it or enjoys it. What matters is the end result, not how it started, not what happened in the beginning or middle, but how it ends. And my faith is that it will never truly end. There is a movement dedicated to the prevention of suicides. It's called the Project Semicolon. Now, the idea is that a writer uses a semicolon when he has more to say. The semicolon is used to continue the thought expressed in any particular statement, semicolon, as opposed to a period ending that statement. Just when you think a statement is over, that little semicolon allows the author to write more and the reader to read beyond what was just stated. That punctuation marking, the semicolon, implies that the statement continues and my story is not yet over. I felt like since I turned a half a century old, it's a good time to write this autobiography. This is my story, beginning, middle, and the assurance that no matter how the written version ends, it will carry on. Life is hard, and it might not get easier. However, just when you think it is at the end, it is really only just begun, because I believe in God, and He has a plan that goes beyond this biological world, beyond biology altogether, and thus beyond my biography. So, I travel this road I'm on, continue to write, and attempt to look back to where I've come from, and where I am, and then where I'm going. I was born February 3rd, 1968, the day after Groundhog's Day. How little did I know the jokes my dad told about what would be picked up by me when my daughter Olivia Avery was actually born on Groundhog's Day 36 years later. If she saw her shadow and went back inside the womb, does that mean you'll have a longer winter or an early spring? That joke was told over and over about me, and then I did it over and over about my daughter Olivia. I've noted that our earliest memories fade as we age, and yet eventually our childhood becomes more clear to us than what happened yesterday or for what we had for breakfast. I know my parents remember about my birth and what my two sisters, Pauline and Colleen, tell me. I know they wanted to name me Casper, the friendly ghost. He was popular in 1968, and the familiar wisp to the top of his head. My dad, Ed, says that my mom, Aileen Fay, recommended we have my name rhyme with Aileen, Colleen, and Pauline. With that in mind, he says that they considered naming me Eugene. Apparently, my dad, doesn't particularly like that name, and the joke only works out when not telling it to somebody who actually cherishes the name, or is named Eugene. As I grew older, I learned that there was a great drummer, Gene Krupa, and if they would have named me Eugene, I would have shortened it to Gene, just as I shortened Thomas to Tom. My mother's dad, who died before I was born, was named Thomas, so they officially named me Thomas. My dad's dad was Frank. The Frank was already taken by one of my first cousins. Robert was already taken by my dad's brother, his brother's son. So, they gave me my dad's first name as my middle name. 26 years later, I gave my first and only son the same middle name, Edward. My mom was concerned with my birth. She had experienced death of so many people in her life, including witnessing the tragic death of her 2-year-old sister, who tragically fell out of a 2-story window. Apparently, I had no complications, and they, shortly after my birth, took me to see my grandmother on my mother's side. My mom proudly laid me on her mother's chest. Shortly after she, my grandmother on my mom's side, died. I obviously don't recall that, but it is a meaningful recollection my parents share with me. I ask myself, what do I recall? How did my life go at the start? What was it like? How much can be written about my life just after I was born? Do the things that happen as soon as I took my first breath of air on earth have anything to do with my autobiography? The point is, I took that first breath and was blessed to continue breathing. What can I write about this life that has been over 50 years in the making now? I believe God's vastness of all creation is beyond what we can take in and put into words. He knew us before we were born, and if we trust Him, He will preserve us after we die. Can we capture in words a documentary about His work? Well, I think I should try. Again, writing an autobiography is no small task. How do I capture and describe who I was and who I want to be remembered as? The rhetorical question is, how can I write anything about my life, the breaths, the steps, the experience I have on this planet, without giving glory to God, my Creator? I cannot leave Him out. My dad insisted that I remembered people I met when I was 2 or 3, but I only know that what they tell me. We lived in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Here's a picture of me sitting in a chair much bigger than me, with a drum that's almost much bigger than me. We were packed into a row house up there in Philly, with busy streets. This was back when a streetcar with rails below and electricity wires were above, and it traveled down the center of the main road. Automobiles from the 50s and 60s had to maneuver around those bulky, prehistoric, obsolete creatures. As I write this autobiography, I recognize and acknowledge the changes over the past 5 decades and how I survived all those changes, progressions, ramifications, and historical victories. My parents recall that I somehow wandered off one day and walked by myself to a corner store to get some ice cream. It was a time period in history when you could walk to the corner store located on a busy urban street without the fear of crossfire bullets. Back then, as the 60s were ending and the 70s were beginning, we still had trustworthy neighbors. It was one of those friendly neighbors in the city that didn't just bear the name, the city of brotherly love, but lived it out, who found me and brought me back home. That is not something I relate from my own memory. This raises the question, how far back can we remember? What was it like, really like, back then? Is my perspective accurate? Well, for me, I don't think my memory receptor started really working until we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, when I was 2 or 3. Our view of the past is only relative to each of our minds process things. How our minds process things. I believe our past experience can play a major role in building our character, a backstory, if you will. As I write, I'm gaining a better picture of how I developed into who I am today and why I live as I do. Pictures help me recall PA and my grandparents' home sitting on my pop-pop's lap. Frequent visits back there allowed him to be in my life, for me to know him before he died. We received the news of his death while in Florida, and I was too young to comprehend it. I do remember my mom explaining, you know your daddy. Well, his daddy died. I still couldn't comprehend it. I didn't know what death was. I didn't even know where life came from, let alone that people died. I recently had to ask my mom for the dates on when certain things took place. We moved to Jacksonville in 1970. She remembers that I used to throw my bottle out of the crib when I was done, and on the drive down to Florida from PA, I threw my bottle out the manually rolled down open car window, and that is how they broke me away from the bottle. They just said, "It's gone." My Papa Bailey died in 1972. I was only 4. That's my earliest recollection. That gave me a starting point. I do remember things around that age. I'm not sure if those things happened before or after my grandfather's death, but there's no question that his death and my family reaction to it stands out. We gathered around a piece of furniture called a vanity. It was a small stool-like chair that sat in front of a mirror with connecting drawers and side tables. The vanity became the humble altar of prayer as my dad fell to his knees and cried in prayer as he grieved the death of his dad. We all surrounded him in support. My mother told her, my mom told me her sister died around that same time, and I don't recall that at all. I'm not sure why. I know we took a train up to Philly for my grandfather's funeral, but my mom traveled alone to her sister's funeral. My beginnings were a milestone for generations before me. As they receive a tombstone, I was just achieving milestones. But who was truly better off? Those gathering new life in their eternal home, or those of us enduring the temporary strife we face every day here in our temporal dwelling place? I say what we see as the end, and our loss is heaven's gain, and we can't compare this life with what's in store for us after our bodies die. Being human and striving with newborn life, as splendid as it can be, has nothing on the journey and victory over sin and death that Christ made possible. May we always remember the price he paid and live as part of his kingdom. His kingdom come here and now. May his will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. He has gotten me this far, and mostly I acknowledge in faith that he is completely in control of all life, all living things. Through him, we can truly live and develop a biography that is sure to end in rejoicing and shouts of praise. We witness as one person dies, others are born, but my faith is challenged to accept him at his word, that although some die, in him they're made alive and welcome into a new place where death, dying, tears, sorrow, and loss have no place. Again, there is no end to our story, just a new beginning. So, I think age 4 is my earliest recollection. For me, that's where I can really start with writing my autobiography. Living in Jacksonville was great. Here's a photograph. This is a picture from the USO function in Jacksonville with me right here, my dad, Ruth Morrow, that was a friend or a daughter of my dad's friends, and my 2 sisters in the back, Colleen and Pauline, behind me. My parents were buying a house in Jacksonville, Florida, and I think we planned on living out the rest of our lives there as a family there. Little did any of us know what would come in the future years. We live in the now, as we all should. We all strive toward the future, but we weren't so distracted with that to the point of not enjoying the journey as we were presently on. We focused on the present progression, knowing we can't predict the future. Having said that, my dad was always driving toward a better future and pushing himself and the family to take steps necessary so we develop skills, education, and connections that would pay off later in life. As our lives unfolded, we were faced with various opportunities and oppositions. However, we lived life together as a family unit. I had, and still have, an amazing support system because of my family. I had, and still have, an amazing support system because of our family binds and commitments are so strong. My parents had a book called When Two or Three Are Gathered in My Name, Someone Spills the Milk. It was a book devoted to small portions of scripture designed to let God's word speak to the whole family. We never did read it on a regular basis as a family once a day as designated, but we did always share meals together, attended church together, and we were taught biblical morals and standards. I think that helped develop our moral compass and gave us a few solid foundations that would help us as we all grew and matured. I was the youngest of 3 each of us were about 5 years apart. I got along with Colleen, who was the oldest, better than I got along with Pauline, the middle child in our family. Let me first talk about my parents before I get too carried away and jump around from subject to subject. After all, there would be no me without them. As I write this off the top of my head, I think one way of me trying to keep my thoughts organized and on course would be to title each section a chapter and stay on that particular subject for that section of my biography. Writing is all about, I'm sorry, writing is all out, is allowing, I can't, I'm having a little trouble, I apologize. And I can't edit the video, so writing it all out is allowing me to discover more and more about myself, those around me, and how the environment, culture, and time periods I've lived in have affected my progress, my personal journey. In 1968 has now, 50 years later, been pinpointed as one of the most tragic and yet positive, pivotal times in history. That is year That is the year I was born, 1968. And here I'll share the past 50 decades from my perspective. Now that I've gone back as far as I can remember, to give an introduction, here is Chapter 1. One word keeps coming to mind as I attempt to write my autobiography. That word is vulnerability. With that in mind, here we go with Chapter 1. Although this is an autobiography, it's not just about me. It's really an overall story with deeper meanings, much bigger than me. Let this early footage roll on the video of my dad trying to play an 8mm home movie from when they first got married up until I turned 8. That's photographic evidence. Hey, that sounds like a good band name, or at least a working title for something. Perhaps we'll revisit these videos later if we can get the damn thing to work right. My mom and dad and my elementary ages. Here's a photo of my parents in 2019. I could and probably will write a whole book on just my parents. For this chapter, I'm going to try to keep it autobiographical, if that's even a word, I don't know. Giving my perspective on their role in my life. I'm always also amazed when I think back to the role I played in their lives. Oh, how they loved, cared, and point blank tolerated me, and they still do. It's not easy to sit and write an entire autobiography, but I think it can be very helpful in discovering who we are and why we are the way we are and how to relate with others. Sometimes we become who we are because of our parents. Other times, people develop into who they are and what they do in spite of how they were raised and the poor example that their parents displayed. In certain cases, when a parent is successful in life, their children become successful in life. When a parent is abusive, many people feel that their offspring will follow suit. However, the child that is neglected or abused could later grow up and mature into a very loving, caring parent that shows healthy physical discipline but without any abuse behavior because they want to be a better parent than what they witnessed firsthand as a child. I personally know people who have overcome the odds. Their childhood memories are dark, but their future and the future of their children is bright. Parents set examples for us without even trying. As humans, we usually mimic what we see, so many times our characteristics are inherited, not something we purposefully achieved. Our mannerisms seem to just come naturally. Others will even comment how much we remind them of our mother or father, not just in looks, but our actions and decision making. For me, both of my parents were great role models and consciously worked on their own lifestyles, just as a sculptor works on chiseling something out of a rock. They purposefully took part in building a solid foundation for themselves and didn't allow negative influences to indicate what they would and wouldn't partake of. They were also proactive in the lives of their children, purposefully nurturing our nature. Come to think about it, they were extremely positive, active role models in every neighborhood and community in which they were involved. In the 70s, my mom, like many mothers from that decade, stayed home and took care of the house and household. This is more than a full-time job in and of itself. Although she cleaned house, did laundry, made sure we got to school and such, my dad also washed dishes, vacuumed, helped with the laundry, and was very active with household chores, as well as working outside in our yard. Each of us kids were responsible for certain tasks too. My sisters would debate the fact that all I did was collect the garbage and clean the baseboards, while they were assigned many more chores than I. Being the youngest, I think many times less responsibility is expected and given because you are the baby. Now that I'm older and I have 5 children of my own, I see that that is often the case. Often, children grow faster than our minds allow them to. We find ourselves wanting them to always be our sweet little innocent baby, and yet sometimes we want them to grow up faster. Here's a photograph of my dad teaching me to march. Oh, my dad. Oh, what I could say about my dad. One thing for sure is that he did not sit still very often. Even in his 80s now, in 2019 as I write this, he finds it hard to be still, and if he does, he falls asleep. He has always gone to the extreme, and still does. I have to add a note here. As I record this audio part in 2026, my dad is actually 90 years old now. Continuing on. Growing up, I don't remember seeing my dad just sit. He was always on the go. He had a hammock in the backyard that rotted from lack of use, but it was always there for the rare rest he might have taken. In my early childhood, it was also rare for him to be away from the house on long extended work trips. Somehow he always put 100% of himself at his job and 100% of himself at home. He started the first USO in St. Augustine, just south of Jacksonville, where I live close to now. As a family, we'd get tours of military ships, particularly in parades, and saw great performers, all part of the USO work. This is a picture of me around that time period. Often, I'd end up on a parade float dressed as a soldier. I especially enjoyed the carnival rides brought in at the USO Pals Day to raise money and awareness of the USO, the United Service Organization for active military men and their family. Here's a picture of me and a little boy named Jimmy Morrow, the son of my dad's co-worker, Danny Morrow. I'm packed in here with Jimmy and Ruthie Morrow, Danny's son and daughter. This was the only real link between the Salvation Army and the U.S. Army. My dad formerly was a Salvation Army officer. Later, he became an AP sergeant. That's Air Police for the Air Force. He returned to the work of the Salvation Army uniquely as a liaison between the two different structured corporations, the U.S. Army and the Salvation Army. I can still picture seeing my dad's shiny shoes and long legs move at the speed of light. I never reached the height of my dad's physical physique. He's 6 foot tall, and at my tallest, I'm only 5'7". As a child, 2 to 3 feet tall, when I couldn't move my feet fast enough to keep up, he'd always carry me. I remember being carried often. I lost my place. Oh, so he could get to all the people he wanted to touch base with, places he needed to be, and things he desired to accomplish in his own speedy, almost always rushed time frame of his life. He was very driven and drove us with that same intensity. I even have a vivid recollection of being carried as he walked the Jacksonville beach in leisure. I can still taste the salt water on his shoulder as he cradled me or gently draped me over his shoulder like a beach towel. Here's a quick picture of what they thought was me on the beach as a child, but I think it's actually Pauline, my sister. When not trying to follow my dad, I'd be at the feet of my mom. To this day, she still remarks how a simple chore like ironing brings her satisfaction. She basks in the sense of accomplishing tasks and the priceless reward of a hard day's work at home with and for our family. You know, there's something to be said about accomplishing things for the well-being of your family. Both of my parents excelled in that. In my life, the work I enjoyed the most was when I was actually doing something that was directly related to the care of others, especially my own family, my amazing children, Kiri, Alex, Olivia, Abby, and Maddie. At certain times of my life, I was a stay-at-home dad. My full-time job was not just a job to make money, but sweeping the floors at home, changing diapers, getting the laundry and dishes clean, taking my kids to playgrounds or playing with them on the floor. To this day, I still treasure that as the best job I ever had. My parents found satisfaction in living life, and they showed it. They knew the importance of a family as a unit. Although they were in their prime age of their lives in the 60s, they never went to a drug or alcohol for an escape or for pleasure. They took in the simple things and found joy in family. They looked to God as a foundation and built upwards from there. I just had a flashback to my dad in a hammock in the backyard back in Jacksonville, Florida. He did take time to relax and recreate. We have a very big backyard back then. It was on the Pottsburg Creek in Jacksonville, Florida, which flowed into the St. Johns River. We even had an area for our own chicken coop. Here's a picture from 1971. I'm with my grandfather and grandmother and a drum. Our yard spread a pretty far distance from the house, about 2 acres. I was encouraged to get out of the house and venture some distance. I think my constant banging on anything that resembled a drum had a lot to do with my parental prompting to get out of the house. We did have keep an eye on we did have to keep an eye out for occasional gators that would find their way up the creek and onto our land. My dad and I would go on BB gun shooting safaris in the backyard. He'd place a milk carton in a tree and a can on the ground someplace, challenging me to shoot them on sight as if we were hunting for big game. Somehow, he got roofing companies to come and dump their waste, shingles, and debris so that the land wouldn't be all swampy. He had the foresight to fill in the land so that we'd have a better foundation. That allowed us to walk all the way back to where the water met the land. Also, so the water wouldn't keep claiming more and more land. We knew if we worked hard enough to keep the creek from eroding the land, the value of the property would go up. Until it was filled solid ground, my dad fashioned bridges over the marshy sections with old doors or an old washing machine and a few odds and ends, large parts from various appliances, so that I really felt like I was deep in the Florida Everglades, all without ever leaving our own backyard. There were dangers, but nothing too extreme. This was the 1970s, long before we fully understood environmental precautions or any real level of security and protective gear. Many times I'd be barefoot and climbing through huge tractor tires that were half buried. I didn't wear goggles when we were shooting the BB gun, a helmet when I was riding my bike, let alone shin, wrist, or elbow guards while skateboarding. We weren't breaking any rules. It was just part of life. We paid no mind to those type of things. I'm not sure why. It's not that we were primitive. There was just a general low level of awareness in health or ecology. This was a decade when many cars didn't even come with seatbelts. A funny story about that will come up later. We were sheltered in many ways and watched over probably more than any parent is ever able to do in this day and age. After all, we're now in the 21st century, not just a few years later, but living in an entire different century. In some ways, there was little awareness to health issues. Doctors were actually saying smoking was good for you. There were TV ads stating what brand of cigarettes doctors preferred. Smoking on airplanes, let alone restaurants, was totally permitted. I also remember dune buggy races on the beach. The average, everyday family was even permitted to drive all up and down Jacksonville Beach on the sand. Many people would park their oil-dripping cars and large diesel trucks on the quick-absorbing sand. As kids, we'd use street lights coming on as a signal to come inside. Meeting strangers and going in and out of our neighbors' homes was always welcome. My cousin Robert, who's close to my age, was reminiscent about an older single man down the street from him in Pennsylvania that he and his 4 siblings would visit regularly. They were welcome in his house, and they'd hang out. He was a man friend with no shady or perverted agenda. We knew nothing of molesters or children being kidnapped. It happened, but it was rare or just not heard of. Adults would hand out candy even when it wasn't Halloween, just to be nice, not to trap kids like in the fictional story of Hansel and Gretel. There were huge organizations such as the Boys and Girls Clubs or the Boys and Girl Scouts of America, the YMCA, and the YWCA, standing for Young Men or Women's Christian Association, whose structure have dramatically changed over the past 50 years. There's nothing wrong with change, but in the case of some organizations, perversion not only entered their structure, but was tolerated, and in some circumstances conducted by various leaders in certain sects of their corporation. To avoid overpriced hotels or pitching a tent when in need of shelter, people didn't go to organizations to just flop, use drugs, and be promiscuous. They went in with a need to avoid being homeless. Not even the church was exempt from the wildfire of human perversion and ungodly passions. I recall the Catholic Church faced accusations of molestation by some of their priests and abuse by some of the nuns. Cults existed, no doubt, but not to the extent of today. Now, I think now more than ever, too many of our righteous have become so self-righteous and lost without admitting it. And I feel like there are many, many more wolves in sheep's clothing. What used to be sanctuary has become Satan's playground and no longer a safe place for refugees and divine comfort and guidance. I guess the hypocrisy from Jesus' day was just matured into a more sophisticated monster that looks appealing on the outside with its glitz and glamour, but inside it's full of the same prideful, rotten muck waiting to suck people in, chew them up, and spit them back out. Rather than blatantly proclaiming to be a cult, some well-intended agencies have been corrupted from within its own ranks and structure. I think too many people prey, Prey, on others rather than pray, Pray, for them. Perhaps it's inevitable that some leaders end up giving in to their personal desires rather than abiding to the original desires and mission of the once fully trustworthy groups, let alone a benevolent, loving God who desires to watch over and protect mankind. Just a few bad apples end up ruining the once pure motives and trustworthy communities. Rather than being godly and Christ-like, some think they are God and decide to play God, placing a bad taste in the mouths of people seeking to belong to a wholesome group. When I was growing up, people were victims of a variety of crimes. However, we rarely locked our doors and couldn't fathom a police officer, teacher, minister, or neighbor being unjust in any way, form, or fashion. Granted, I grew up in Florida before moving just outside of the more metropolitan city of Cleveland, Ohio. The area of Jacksonville, Florida, where we lived, as far from any metropolitan city or urban community. It wasn't completely rural, out in the woods or boonies, nor was it a subdivision as we saw in the 80s. But there's no question, it is common knowledge, and statistics will show that Florida in general makes the headlines with the craziest stories. Now we are faced with headlines such as Florida man ... followed by unimaginable feats that are stranger than fiction. When you do a search, it states, here's the latest, because of the regularity of foolish, incomprehensible behaviors. It's my understanding that within these past few years, Jacksonville was labeled as having the highest murder rate. It's no laughing matter, but I heard a comedian hit the nail on the head one time when he sarcastically said, Florida's should change their state motto to Florida, where the elderly take salt baths and young people smoke bath salts. Again, in general terms, I think those who have lived the past 20 years or more can say that they have seen drastic changes in society in good ways and bad ways regarding crime, safety, precautions, and health awareness. Maybe it's because we continue to make such great leaps in news media availability. People are more aware, but also more afraid of fraudulent lawsuits or being accused of treating anyone unfair. Either way, sometimes I feel like our awareness has risen to the point of judging almost everyone and everything, having to question all offers and taking every extra precaution possible. We find it strange and unusual when someone's simply nice to the point of having us to question what their hidden agenda is. Part of us have a hidden fear that people must be nuts or just strange when they're trying to simply show genuine sincerity. What once were common acts of kindness are now seen as weird and the act of some perverted individual trying to take advantage of our innocence. This is often, I'm sorry, there's even an official term now describing this, catfishing, as in he or she was being catfished by a cruel prankster. The definition is so specifically and deliberately lure someone into a relationship by means of fictional online persona. We also see seem to find it necessary to give extra thought of how we word things. Most live with an extra amount of concern about being politically correct to the point of expressing our extreme amounts of censorship rather than a healthy balance of respectfulness when using our freedom of speech. There's a line from a song called Like It, Love It, Need It that I think gives a good description of the decade we're living in. The line is, we're anti everybody. Call it paranoia. It goes on to say, I ain't no judge or jury, but I'm praying for ya, by the band DC Talk. As I grew older and somehow more wise and mature, I have to say that times were not necessarily better when I was growing up, just different. Too often, older people disrespect the youth of today simply out of misunderstanding or perhaps because they feel disrespected. Isn't that what causes turmoil in families? A generation against generations? Maybe we can uphold things we treasure from our past without insisting and fighting the natural change and ongoing evolution of mankind. I'd like not to argue over the standard terms of evolution, man evolving from a monkey, but recognizing progress and progression, accepting that things change without compromising our own values and standards. As I raise children of my own, I pray to the one and only God, with a capital G, the one whom I strive to have a personal relationship with. I daily trust His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The world in general may not give Him credit, but I do, and not only because that's the way I was raised. Sometimes something needs to be said here about what I see and experience while visiting my parents now in the year 2019. In certain ways, it's like jumping back in time, back when there seemed to be more family values and somehow value found in family. I notice bookshelves filled with books, not a tablet or iPad, filled with ebooks. On top and within the bookshelf are figures of past Salvation Army leaders sitting next to a Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, kneeling at the feeding trough of the baby Jesus. The makeshift cradle is empty, just as the cross is empty. My folks share the same belief as I. Jesus grew up no longer in the cradle. Jesus died on the cross. He's not still there. We take joy in our faith that He rose and He's coming again. Mom was raised Catholic, but as the dogmatic lines between Catholicism and Protestants blurred and blended, so also religion takes a back seat. But in my family's case, only to develop a relationship with and through Jesus the Christ. It's His standard we try to live by. Regardless of what's going on in the world around us, my life is one that went just, I'm sorry, my life is one that went from just a ritualistic religious attendance of church to getting personal with God, one on one. The platform and foundations set for me by my parents has definitely helped. For now, for the funny, okay, for the funny, story about cars with no seatbelts. When I was 2 or 3, I used to stand on the seat next to my dad as he drove. He'd put his arm around me for security, and we'd even pass back and forth a glass bottle of Coca-Cola from time to from time to time, share a Coke and a smile. On one such night, a police officer who had been following us for a while pulled my dad over and approached the car, shining his bright flashlight inside the car window. My dad slowly rolled down the window by hand. My dad recalls seeing my big brown eyes being the size of saucers, and the white light made my blonde hair shimmer. The police officer broke into boisterous, out loud laughter. He explained to my dad that it appeared to him from behind that the adult driver and his date were sharing a bottle of beer. He really thought I was a full grown female. I can imagine his surprise when he saw it was just a father and son sharing a Coke. While in Jacksonville, Florida, just starting school, my dad and I joined the Indian Guides. In 2015, apparently they had to change the theme of the group or be dropped from support by the YMCA. All I know is of my first-hand experience back in 1970s. We learned about real Native American tribes, some of which no longer exist, and it was a great way to get fathers and their children to bond with each other and others. We went to a camp out overnight and met regularly to play games and learn a few life skills. I think I gained more social skills through the program than anything else. Now, as was the tradition for everyone in the tribe, my dad and I had to come up with good Indian nicknames for us personally. After much thought, we came up with our own descriptive Indian names. Are you ready for this? My dad was Big Frog, and I was Little Tadpole. It fit us perfectly. We were two peas in a pod. Our Halloween costumes were oftentimes something we both wore as a matching theme. I don't mean that we were just lookalikes dressing the same in matching outfits. What I mean is one time he was the Jolly Green Giant and I was a little guy called Sprout. You'll see that in the motion pictures being shown right now. Yep, at one time he was the Jolly Green Giant and I was the little guy called Sprout. Those were very, very popular in the commercial advertising of canned and frozen vegetables back in those days. Another time, I got on his shoulders and wore a big long shirt so that it appeared like we were one giant person. I really liked that, mainly because I got to smoke a fake cigar and wear a derby hat. Although I was very young, I recall our days as a family unit living in Jacksonville, Florida. While on the subject of the costume parties, my sister Pauline dressed as an upside down clown. The problem was that she had to walk around with shoes on her hands and stretch her arms up in the air above her head for it to look right. and work right. Because my dad ran the USO Club in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, we got to go to dances and all kinds of parties, see live bands, and experience all kinds of performers. I recall clearly parades we not only watched, but in which we were participants. Like I said earlier, my mom worked at home mostly. That, in and of itself, was a full-time job with me not old enough to be in school yet. And as I look back, I learned that from our family, as important as a career and being successful at a job is, it is also social clubs and church activities that helped us make sure we had time to bond with each other and others. Social clubs still exist in this day and age, but with the internet, I think they're more virtual than reality. However, people are still drawn to have some type of community gathering, meetups, and fellowship in real life with others with whom they have something in common. As a family, we always had a very tight relationship, but we didn't keep to ourselves. My dad, being very outspoken and an extrovert, made friends with everyone who crossed his path. To this day, he still keeps in touch with people that he met long before I was even born. I'm not like him, but I am a lot like him. I spend a lot of time with him. I was close to my mother as well, and I spent a lot of time with her during the day. But as I said before, during those days and times, boys had fathers in the household, spent more time with their father, and girls spent more time with their mother. Divorce was very rare, and mixed families, or whatever the political correct term would be for families that didn't fall under the traditional structure mom, dad, and 3.5 children, were just something we would see on TV modeled by the Brady Bunch. As the 70s ended, we started to see more acceptance toward families that were mixed in some way or another. The popular TV sitcom Different Strokes was about a single white man who adopted two African American boys. It's very strange to me now to think how unusual it was back then to see an African American dating a Caucasian, let alone families with different ethnical backgrounds. Although I didn't personally see racial issues, in some cases people were very discriminatory in those years. There were riots and even a few businesses in certain US cities that were discriminate toward individuals' race. I didn't understand why, and I still can't comprehend any human being, regardless of their race, religion, beliefs, gender, or otherwise, being treated unfairly, shunned, or even physically beaten. I never understood why anyone would be considered a minority. It's ironic to me to this day how the definition of the word minority has changed. It used to just mean that there are not as many and that they are not part of the majority. However, nowadays I think the definition and connotation to being a minority means that you're treated unfair, regardless of the census count of how many members of any particular race there is. Living in Florida, where I did seem to come in contact with more whites than anyone else from other races, My oldest high school, my my oldest sister's high school was just starting to integrate by busing other ethnic cultures into the school so all races would be able to be intermingled. We were out of the 60s and now we were out of the 60s now, and it was time to no longer have things labeled whites only and take down the signs claiming no coloreds allowed. Being born in 1968, I would never see that ridiculous and moronic behavior in humanity. As a family, soon we would be moving to Cleveland, Ohio, and my dad's main work would be in a downtown area called Huff, Hough. That, less than a decade before our arrival, had serious race riots taking place. Billy Graham went through the neighborhood, and the Salvation Army built an amazing community center. More on that in the next chapter. Many books, journals, and documentations have already been written about the historical downfall, both the de-evolution and improvement of mankind. For me, here and now, I want to remain on the specific subject of my parents, the examples they set, as well as my engagement with them and their discipline in my life. My parents sheltered me from many things, but they sheltered themselves also. Perhaps much can be said about some dangers of being sheltered, but I know now that there are great advantages to building a hedge of protection around oneself and around your family. This may not come up on the video clear, but it's a Bible verse, and I'm going to have to zoom in to see. It's from Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Oh. Not that we should block out the needs of others and the world around us, but that we can benefit from being on guard, setting our privacy fences, firewalls, and focusing on healthy environment while minding our own business. If we all would focus on living better rather than pointing out how others are living, I think there would be a little more peace in our neighborhoods, schools, churches, and even in the world. We can remove things that are toxic to us and toxic to our family and to our family's well-being so that our survival rate has a better chance. Although we may not agree with how others live, I think it's more important for us to focus on how we live. Trust God to make things right and accept the fact that even family is going to be as different as each person in those families. Each person has to choose how they'll live their lives because we're all different, and that means there will be civil rivalry and discord. But as I was growing up, what I saw with my mom and dad, who gave their contribution to each other, focused on themselves while still caring for us, each other, and showing care to those outside our family unit too. They loved themselves enough to recognize that we are all connected, and if we care for those around you, then your life is better too. They expressed unconditional love to everyone without adopting the swingers lifestyle or the experimental drug phase that was huge in the 60s and 70s. I don't recall my mom and dad bashing others' lifestyles and habits while at the same time making a decision to live how they wanted to, drug-free, alcohol-free, and monogamous. The TV sitcom All in the Family displayed a character named Archie Bunker, who was the perfect example of a bigot. My father would, from time to time, express his intolerance for certain lifestyle choices, but when he interacted with the community, he was always very kind. It was as if, at home, he felt self to carry on, rant, and rave about things and certain people that bothered him, rubbing him the wrong way. He just didn't understand. I think misunderstanding, or perhaps not understanding at all, those who are different, is where the real problem with acceptance starts. Here's a quote from Neil Peart: "Quick to judge, quick to anger, slow to understand. Ignorance and prejudice and fear walk hand in hand." With this in mind, outside the four walls of our home, we engaged with people displaying and participating in lifestyles or behaviors they decided, or my dad decided, some decided were unacceptable, but we accepted them. My dad hated lying, but he didn't hate the liar. It wasn't really a matter of, as some say, hate the sin, love the sinner. It was more along the lines of people are people. We're all participating in things that are perhaps not healthy for us or society, let alone that fit into a relationship with a holy God. But Christ himself showed acceptance to all. We read documentation, the Bible, of Jesus, the Christ, not going around slinging out everyday people, singling out everyday people's sin. Rather, he is seen often condemning the misconduct of religious leaders who condemned others yet were sinful in other ways. Christ knew they should know better, and one sin is not worse than another. It was just as wrong to hate and not accept people in love as it was to blatantly go against any one of the 10 Commandments. Even on the cross, dying, Jesus asked the Heavenly Father to forgive those doing this because they didn't know what they were doing. Without getting too far off the subject, I must say that I witnessed my mom and dad following the example Christ set as much as humanly possible, regardless of society and the religious community stance on what is considered righteous or unrighteous. As a personal note, in my family, in our household, it was obvious that my dad, in particularly, couldn't comprehend how people could commit to the same sex relationship. But he was able to overlook his personal convictions enough to let people be who they chose to be. As I grew up, I witnessed people who were very close to us who lived lives as far away as possible from the example that Christ set. For my mom and dad, although they witnessed people using drugs, even an employee or two who participated in those activities, they did not dismiss, reject, show their disapproval, or even fire them if they were still able to do the job well. My dad sees people as people, more than the color of their skin, their lifestyles, their gender, or sexual choices. Working for the Salvation Army and attending the Bible-based Christian service, they often only enhanced and encouraged this kind of unconditional love. My parents had not only seen people improve their relationship with God and experience with God's grace, love, and mercy firsthand, they were an instrumental part in it. I do know that my dad, more than my mom, struggled with cultural differences and certain issues that come to the forefront of society, but he always did his best not to get hung up on those debates, knowing that he knew how he needed to live and that God was more than big enough to take on whatever struggles this world and mankind had to offer. Perhaps my mom struggled with issues a bit too, but she was nowhere as near to expressing it as my dad was. It was only within the past few years that my mom has shared with me how difficult her childhood in Alabama was in contrast with her opinions and faith today. God used my mother many times to calm my dad down when some social issues on morality would rise its ugly head. She took God's word to heart and would lovingly help my dad remember that what Jesus said and did. She still holds true to the teaching of Christ that we have a plank in our own eye while pointing out splinters in someone else's eye. None of us are worthy and without sin enough to throw the first stone at anyone else. Because of their example, I came to an understanding firsthand that selfishness didn't benefit anyone else and in turn led to destruction, self-destruction. In our family, we discovered a good, trustworthy moral compass in God's Word and in the teaching of the God-man, Jesus Christ. My parents both took on the responsibility to show us that compass, not just in words, but in their deeds, in action, living it out, and no shame, no compromise, no reservations. I still apply the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I also raise my children with that mentality rather than encouraging revenge. My father, being a military man and loving that lifestyle and discipline, had a hard time accepting when things were not a certain way. But my mom would balance that out and graciously comfort and persuade my dad, if nothing else, to at least agree to disagree with us. That gave our family the peace needed to be a functional family. Dysfunctional families are common because of the many personalities and lifestyle choices. Blending them is difficult. Rather than calling our family, or even the United States of America, a melting pot, a tossed salad is a better analogy because with a blending pot, all the ingredients become one. But with a salad, each ingredient stands on its own while still being part of the salad. It is, together, but separate, a real oxymoron of sorts. Each item in a salad is still that item, while at the same time still part of the salad as a whole. The carrot's still a carrot. The cucumber is still a cucumber. Each part is still unique and yet part of the whole salad. We learn to live together, settle arguments, give and take, but stayed tied to our family binds. As a result, we're now an unbreakable bond. When I look back at my mom from the standpoint of when I was learning to literally walk, I mostly recall being on the floor around her feet, playing with my Hot Wheels and plastic green army men. Being a stay-at-home mom, she was always there. That was very common in the 70s, along with attending church regularly. We didn't run around too much, just an occasional trip to the mall, but everything revolved around home and church. I used to joke, and this isn't written down, but it's true. The only real drug problem I had was my parents drug me to church. I found out later in life that in the late 70s, my parents had arguments, strong, heated discussions about my mom getting a job outside the home. Most families in the 70s were not divorced or separated. It wasn't unusual to live on a single income provided by the dad's job and the mother staying home as an occasional job of taking care of all the work on the home front. Unlike growing up in the 1920s, when it was finally legal for women to vote, things didn't seem unfair from my standpoint. It just made sense for one parent to work outside of the home and the other to work inside the home, a balance of chores, tasks, and responsibilities. Also, later on in life, when I had my own children, I realized the cost to pay for childcare was pretty much what I got paid, if not a big chunk of it. So I stayed at home to care for my children and the house. That was the best job I ever had. All of my children had me taking care of them full time before they started school. Although I'm divorced now, I was a stay at home dad while each child was at the preschool age right up until my youngest, Abigail. Unfortunately, I was going through a divorce when Abigail was just 2 or 3, but I was there right up until then. My other 4 children had me in the house and taking them to preschool and then to elementary school. The only thing that became an issue for me, because my mom was at home all the time, was that when I did have to step outside for school, church, or summer camp, I was scared to death and overcome with anxiety. I obviously, I obviously, I was obviously oblivious to any tension or financial strain in our household income and the paying of bills, but recognized a serious disorder in my mind when forced to step out of my comfort zone home. It was only then I was really away from the big strong arms of my dad and the tight hugs of my mom. As I write this, the reality of that hedge freaks me out. I truly was a homeboy, a mama's boy, and always had my hand held. I guess that's because I was the youngest, or maybe that had something to do with it. I'll talk about my sisters in the next chapter, but I do feel the need to just mention here how often my mom was the referee between us siblings. Pauline was in the age bracket of 8 to 13 or 14, elementary school and middle school, soon going to start high school. And my sister Colleen was 13 to 18 or 19, high school and graduation. I was only at the age of 2 years old and about 7 or 8 while we lived in Jacksonville, Florida. Pauline and I shared a room but fought like cats and dogs, and I'd run to Colleen for protection. So I was so mean and mischievous at times, and because I was the youngest, I think my mom would chalk it up as he's still learning, and he is just the baby of the family. To this day, I'm sure that makes my sisters gag. Personal note here to my sisters, Pauline and Colleen, if you're hearing this or you've read it, I'm sure you've heard me admit to all of this before, and you've heard my apology, but I'm also sure it still makes you gag when you think about how differently we were all treated. I hope that gag can turn into a giggle as we look back at our conduct and misconduct as children. Not only was I the baby, but I was babied a lot too. I do recall getting spanked by my mother, but worse than that was the phrase, "Wait till your father gets home." And that has been a long-lasting material for comedians through the ages because we could identify with it. Although not abusive, his spanking my bottom was a lot harder. Honestly, for me, what was the worst than the physical spanking was the anticipation that led up to it, and ultimately the reality that I had disappointed my parents. I think sometimes our mother didn't tell our dad many things in order to just keep the peace. Again, she was the glue and nails that held our family together peacefully, while my dad was more like the walls and floor around that could only stay intact because of that glue and those nails. Oh, those nails. My mom had a special technique to her disciplining me while in public. If I acted up, she'd casually hold my forearm calmly and unknowingly to anyone else, slowly dig her fingernails into me. The worse I was, the deeper they went. It worked. I used to joke about how my mom would spank me at home with whatever object was at hand, her slipper, a wooden spoon, the vacuum. As I write about my life and family, I recognize what fashioned us together as a home was the combination of the two. Not just a mom and a dad, but this mom and this dad. In my dad's 1970s frame of mind, things would only work if he worked a job outside the household and my mom worked inside the home. It was in 1975, the mid 1970s, when my dad got a better job offer and we were planning to move to Ohio, a little town called Strongsville outside of Cleveland. It was there some real milestones were made. My oldest sister, Colleen, graduated high school in Jacksonville and eloped. My sister, Pauline, was in middle school, about to start high school, grades 9 through 11, and I was promised a new dog and drum lessons after we moved. As I mentioned above, being so young, I wasn't fully aware of all the progressions toward adulthood and the responsibility my family members shouldered. My mom's desire to work outside the home was incredible and increasing as we were, her children, were all attending school and not at home all day. My grandma, who we called Gram, still lived in Philadelphia, then with her sister Eve and her nephew Bill, since her husband, my pop-up, died. Her adjustment to being a new widow weighed on my dad, and it was decided that my mom could go to work and Graham could live in our home and take care of things there. So we left Jacksonville, Florida, With its nice weather, the big backyard, great fishing, our own chickens, and USO involvement, and we settled into the extremely cold winter conditions of Ohio. It was a new everything for everyone. My dad running a huge community center in Cleveland, my mom getting a job as a secretary with the Salvation Army Divisional Headquarters in Northeast Ohio, a job she was well equipped for, having been trained at a tech school. It was a time of new schools for Pauline and me, and new to living without our oldest sister, Colleen, in our house for the first time. Overall, when I look back at my parents, I see the man my father stood for and the woman behind the man. They supported each other and their children. Life was always more than just a job outside the home. During those years of my infancy and elementary development, my dad was working on getting his master's degree in sociology. I had no idea then the amount of work that it took, how many bills had to be met, but I know now they did. They did it together. They have always, I lost my place. They have always had a strong focus on themselves, but saw the family unit as part of who they were. If they had not worked as one, although two very different people, I'm sure that our family, and I personally, would have turned out different. I love the quote, behind every good man is a woman. The reality is, behind every good man is a woman rolling her eyes. I don't know who I picked that up from, but probably several people have said that in history. Mom made dad, and dad made mom, and my parents made us their children. Not just physically giving birth to us, but developmentally giving us the tools and a very solid foundation on which to build and stand. Not just literally, metaphorically, but metaphorically too. My sisters agreed that our parents' determination, dedication, and patience made us who we are to this day. We're given that good moral compass, and although the world around us fought for which way was up, the real magnetic north would always eventually point the right way. Their faith in us, each other, and God Almighty was the real key to success. Not a better job, being at home, participating in extra activities outside the home, attending church rigorously and religiously. That was all part of life. But following Christ, the God man, was the foundation and key to living we each came to know personally. Overall, when I look back and recall fun, good times with minor shouts of anger followed by joy because we worked it all out, I feel like we've gone from gags to giggles. What a family. In our house and lives, things were always loud, and those responses showed we were alive, much like unpleasant feedback from a PA audio system from time to time. It was proof that this thing is on and working. Fights showed we had spirit, vigor, pep, and life. Although I was the youngest and completely oblivious to growing up obstacles, I know how now that it's because of those oppositions new opportunities were provided and life took on certain turns in direction accordingly, but one thing, one element, one constant that held consistently, remaining firm without fail, was the foundation that was under our family as a whole. Life isn't just about the good weather. There is rain and storms and snow. Mother Nature follows the guidance of the Father of all creation in order to produce a harvest. The inclement weather is just as important as the bright, sunshiny days. Storms don't last forever and may cause what we refer to as a disaster, but God provides what God provides is part of a much larger plan. Nature is all about balance. The rain and hurricanes wash away debris so things can rebuild. Fire, we see as destructive, provides the earth with a much needed carbon to grow new plants and new trees. When autumn comes, followed by winter, we see things all around us die, only to come back to life in the spring and live all summer long once again. For everything, there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. Ecclesiastes 3. Turn the page. The story goes on. Life goes on. We just have to breathe it in among any pollution that may fill the air. And ultimately try to have a home that keeps toxic fumes out. Let me read that again. Life goes on. We just have to breathe it in among any pollution that may fill the air, and ultimately try to have a home that keeps the toxic fumes out. While in this chapter on my parents, I've reminisced about the first home we lived in when I was first starting my life journey, my journey in life. I was born in Philadelphia, but we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, when I was about 2 after my birth. Although I wasn't exposed to many hard knocks in life, I did see a few examples of some people who struggled and were very dysfunctional. Simple things like neighbors or people who'd come in contact with through our service in church, part of the Salvation Army. Little things in life were turned into powerful messages, and simple things were grand part in developing me into who I am today. Perhaps I will be getting away from the main topic matter of this chapter, Mom and Dad, but they were my world and an intricate part of everything around me. I remember going to work with my dad at the USO and playing with billiard balls under the table. Here's a picture. Maybe not everything in our life, all the little small experiences, have amazing, huge impact on us, but I do think that the small things matter. The little encounters and events can make a big difference. Perhaps we remember the chaotic changes, but all the little things that I can recall are now forming a much larger picture for me and prove to be a long-lasting impression that keeps my moral compass not only pointing north, but grateful for it. As I move forward, like I'm like a guy in a rowboat facing backwards, I look back at part of my life when I was finally old enough to start school. My first 2 years of school, kindergarten and first grade, were there in Jacksonville, Florida. The past Christmas of 2018, an 8mm projector was pulled out to play home movies that remarkably endured well over 50 years. What you're seeing in the background during this reading here is what we looked back on. Jacksonville was a great time for me and my family. It was the last location we were all in the same household before Colleen grew up and moved out on her own, before Pauline started high school, before my mom worked outside our home, and before Dad started another career. In the next chapter, I'll talk about my sisters, but for now, I wanted to stay fixed on our parents and early elementary years. My dad's involvement with the USO took us from Jacksonville, Florida to visits to St. Augustine, where I live close to now. As my dad was part of the very first USO in that area, I don't personally know a life that was formed by harsh, poor living conditions, poverty, or abusive family members. Born in 1968, although there was still conflict overseas in the Vietnam, people in other countries were in such pain, I knew nothing of that. Unlike my parents, who were born and being raised during World War II, 1939 to 1945, the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, and were in their prime during the Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975. I am vastly removed from the time period of my parents who survived the Great Depression in 1929. It is hard to believe, but my grandparents were born and being raised and served their country during World War I, 1914 to 1918. I mean, my grandmother was born in 1912. Sometimes we have to stop our personal pity parties and consider our surroundings. Take history into account and truly thank God for what we have and for what we don't have. If it weren't for times of war, poverty, and unrest, we may very well take times of peace, provision, and prosperity for granted. Writing this autobiography has been a real eye-opener, and I'm humbled. As strange as it may sound, I'm also feel ashamed by the fortune I've been given. It truly puts things into perspective. Our wars, battles, and struggles in this day and age are not external conflicts and military strongholds. No, we're met face to face with internal, civil, and social warfare daily. In America, too, often, we can be heard saying, "I'm starving," just 3 hours after we've had a meal. We are often able to donate money to save animals while children around the world, including the USA, are literally starving. When I take an honest look at my surroundings, growing up and even to this day, I can see bickering over a parking space and money being shot into outer space while suicide and petty arguments affect the human race. We seem to be pledging allegiance to the almighty dollar rather than being able to stand in unity as a country, trust the government, and even acknowledge God as our creator. Prosperity is a wonderful thing, but it also breeds contentment to the point of responding with contempt. I ask myself if we've become so content and comfortable that we find it easy to simply complain about any and every little thing, nitpicking our way through life rather than being able to truly satisfied and fulfilled. It's apathy. Empathy and sympathy, a stranger to us because We have all we need and almost everything and anything we want. I see the average American as weary and paranoid, not sure who we can trust, and questioning our own talents, skills, and abilities, all the while feeling proud and boasting of our accomplishments. Long gone are the days of all for one and one for all. I feel like no other time in history has there been such prosperity to the point where even the low-class society has more than our history's middle class ever had. Don't misunderstand. I'm not a political person, nor am I one to complain about the United States, uh, the United State, nor am I one to complain about the state the United States is in. For me, the real challenge is not to take anything for granted and to live, love, and ultimately acknowledge for who God, for who He is and all He has done, doing, and gonna do. When I'm faced with hardship, ironically, it causes me to search for treasures beyond my financial, physical, mental, and emotional means. We've never lived in a century with more ways or more means of compatible communication, like TV, the internet, cell phones, and yet our families and government and communities are crumbling for lack of communication. I'm not hoping for persecution and destruction, but I do feel like there's a need, a genuine wake-up call is needed. I see a need for a revival, a renewal in our lives that we apply daily, not just on special occasions. Shouldn't the Christmas spirit that some act on be an attitude carried throughout the whole year? When we see simple and random acts of kindness, we marvel at the rarity of it. Holding the door, offering your seat, walking someone home or across the street. This type of behavior is not only unusual, it's even met with opposition and fear that the person doing such things has an ulterior motive, or that they are acting as if others are not their equal. For many of us, I'm not sure we know and fully appreciate that what we have until we no longer have it. Losing our electricity during a storm is a perfect example of this. I heard a comedian talking about how when they lost their electricity, he went to he went to put soup in the microwave. Then he went to watch TV, fumbled around the house, occasionally flipping the light switch, just assuming the electricity would be there. He said humorously, "I was not only grateful to have the electricity when it came back on, but also my soup was done too." Having a first-hand witness to the third world countries on various few mission trips I've been on, I've seen how people in extreme poverty live. What amazes me the most is their sincerity and joy for life itself, not caught up in the philosophy that he with the most toys wins. Writing this autobiography allows me to examine my own life. I'm so thankful, really, to comprehend and embrace the understanding of how God ultimately provides for all, and sometimes He desires to use those who have the means to share with those who have not. Yes, this is my personal belief. God as the Almighty One. And I'm concerned for generations following me, my own children, Abigail, Madeline, Olivia, and Kiri, whose biography can't help but show how prosperity has brought with it glorification of everything but God and a few agencies pleading with the general public to help fight hunger. This generation may know more about how to use modern devices than how to simply pray, rely on God, and share what they have. All we own ends up owning us, and our financial debt dictates what we are able to afford, do, and not do. We're given the opportunity to just charge it, and we're led further into debt as a nation, let alone individuals. Who would have imagined that prosperity would lead us into poverty? Many of us are living our adult lives spending money that we don't even have because it's been given to us with a huge interest rate tacked on the back uh, to pay back, which seems endless. Student debts are a perfect example of that. When I was a child, my parents would tell me, no, you can't do this or that, or we can't go here or there because we don't have the money. And others were even more poor than we were. There's no doubt that I need to go back to only spending money I occasionally have rather than buying into the offers of other credit cards that will allow the purchase hundreds of dollars worth of things, stuff I don't need, then slam me down with the shoulder of full debt. The use of a debit card takes money that is actually in my bank account, while the use of a credit card means I have a debit to pay. How things have turned upside down. Perhaps you don't realize it until it happens, and somehow we believe lies and are persuaded into this lifestyle. Maybe with age comes wisdom, but along with the changes of the years comes confusion, not to mention the increase in technical differences. As I look back at my childhood, I find myself longing for simpler times. I've heard it said, why don't we realize that our golden years are worth more than gold while we are in them? I think I do. I fully realize we are truly blessed to be alive, and God is to be thanked, not only for what He gives us, but even when He takes things away. Life for me is bigger than where I've been and where I am. The fact is that this life is temporal. Regardless of one's belief, the faith of an afterlife or not, our physical lives and all we are comes to an end. We are mortal. I cherish it while I'm here, but I know by faith the best is yet to come. There's a great song by Joe English and the English Band with that very title. That song really typifies the generation my oldest children grew up in. My generation was steeped in different values. There was a time when police, pastors, priests, presidents were all trusted and could be taken at their word. Their actions usually matched their words and true intentions. However, in my generation's time, there has been a great exposure to hidden deeds of the hypocrite. Our wealth and value should be measured by our values and true character rather than our material possessions. Another thing I gained in writing this, it gives me the time to reflect on the times I grew up, but also take a realistic look at the times I'm currently living in. Those on welfare, many times, have more than some who are still working far into the years of when they plan to be retired. The way they raised greatly, the way we have been raised greatly affects the way we decide to live out our adult lives. As I said at the beginning, sometimes we live the opposite way we lived growing up. I hear people saying they want to give their children what they never had, and some people are buying things they always desired when they were children. I'm not sure that is the best way to live life. I think being rich and successful can be measured by a person's core fibers, how rich they are in character and spiritual faith. True treasure that no one can take away can be stripped down to where a person's heart is. I believe that God, in the flesh of the man Jesus Christ, tells us to seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things, our needs and more, will be given to us. Matthew 6:33. Not that I grew up financially rich as some of my friends, but our needs were always met. We even had more than our needs, and most importantly, I was told and shown the worth that comes in the form of a relationship with God. We were considered typical middle class family. We were not rich by any means, but we were not poor either. In comparison with my grandparents went through, we were wealthy. But in my opinion, what made us truly rich was the treasures found in the love we had for each other. It was that love and family ties that truly supported us and allowed us to carry on. It wasn't until I was an adult that I now realize my hardest lesson and hard knocks come from within. My own mental health issues would be the civil wars and times of Great Depression. I'd have to fight and learn some of the harsh facts uh, of life. I'm having trouble reading. Sorry. This is this is a real part of my life, the reading and my dyslexia, and I didn't want to fall apart in the middle of trying to read my autobiography, but I am, and it's difficult for me. And the dyslexia then affects depression, and then I will start to get caught up in my own self little pity party of shit that's supposed to be manure to help me grow, but eventually it does. I wrote this down, which is also written in my autobiography, that sometimes we have to stop our own personal pity parties and consider our surroundings, take history into account, and truly thank God for what we have and for what we don't have. It's all part of His plan, and He knows what's best. I'm going to keep holding His hand. Let me see if I can pick up reading here again. Each and every person alive has their own story. And if we open up and take the time, I believe we can not only learn from our own life lessons, but we can learn from each other's lessons on how to live. I remember having extreme anxiety in just attending public school. I was small for my age, and that made me an easy target. Being the youngest, I had two older sisters that showed me that it was going to be okay and that I would grow up too. Until then, unknown to me and others, I had a learning disability and mental health issues that would be revealed to me and others later. Before I write more specifically about me today and my children, I want to spend a little more time on these early days when I was just a child and my parents and my sister were a family unit living under the same roof. The video I've been shown in the background helps, but here are some pictures. This was me in first grade. Oh, look, there it is, right there with the little sweater. That's as far as I can zoom in. And this was my teacher, Mrs. Munford, or the teacher's aide, I guess. I don't know. Kindergarten, 1973 to 1974, Holiday Hill Elementary School, Florida. And I think there were the two teachers and a teacher's aide. I'm not sure. Okay, now the next one is... It took me for a while to see where I was in this picture. I thought that was me. That kid looks like there's something wrong. I don't know. Where am I in this one? I forget. Oh. I'm actually standing back here. There it is. And this was Mrs. M. Scruggs, first grade. That is not me. Although it's the same, similar clothes that we used to wear. That's me. And this was Holiday Hill Elementary School in Jacksonville, Florida, 1974 to 1975. Mrs. Millard Marshall was the principal. I look at this and kind of remember some of the kids too. And then this one is second and third grade. And this was up in Ohio. Zellers Elementary School, Strongsville, Ohio, grade 2 and 3. I think it was Mr. Weaver or Mr. Weber, I don't know. 1976. There was the teacher. There was the teacher. And let me zoom back out. These are the kids in my class. And I think I already, zoomed in on me. And this boy, an Indian boy, he was one of my best friends. I forget his name. Vikram, I think. Anyway. Okay, I think that does it with the pictures. Oh, no, and there's me. My first drum set. My dad's face is classic in that. Okay. For the Lord is good, and his unfailing love continues forever, and his faithfulness continues to each generation. Psalm 100, verse 5. Okay, if I can get the cat to relax and leave me alone, I'll continue reading here. It is embarrassing now to admit, but just attending school. Wait a minute. I jumped ahead here, I think. No, I didn't. Okay, yeah, just attending school and simple tasks like buying my lunch in the public school system was a real challenge for me. Not because I didn't have the money, but because I had not obtained the independent characteristics or confidence to do so. I was filled with fear of the unknown. I never had to do things like that on my own. So when I did, it was a big deal. Homeschooling was not often heard of. When I started elementary school, it was the source of great anxiety for me. I know now it's because my mom was always home and I knew nothing else but her provision. Although we were involved in groups. Okay, the cat's crawling on me. involved in groups interactions such as church gatherings and, as mentioned above, USO dances and bands. I was just the little boy whose parents. Okay, that just fucked up the whole thing. Come on, Alf. Oh man. Okay, I'm almost starting over here. Not really. I'll try to pick up where I left off. Although we were involved in group interaction with church gatherings and, as mentioned above, USO dances and bands, I was just the little boy whose parents and older sisters were always by his side. Occasionally at church, I'd be separated from family members to attend short Sunday school classes, or at the USO club, left alone to sit next to the drum riser, fascinated by the drummer. Even then, my sister and parents were always close by. Perhaps this is common when we are children, not to do things that took us away from our families. All I know is I had extreme separation anxiety long before we knew there was a name for it. Not far from Jacksonville, the Salvation Army has a summer camp, Camp Keystone. During our time in Jax, I was too young to attend. Even if I had been old enough, I don't think I would have had the ability to fight the homesickness. Later in life, when my family moved back to Florida in 1980, it would be the source of great development for me. There was another summer camp in Ohio, and I attempted to attend it. As we moved to Ohio, so also I'll be moving now to the next chapter, where I'll share my experiences as Colleen moved out and my grandmother moved in. Chapter 2 has not been written yet, and I don't know if I started it and it's somewhere where I gotta pick back up, or if I have to just start from scratch, but I do know that that's it for now for my autobiography. And I think it's good to just share this. Even though I have trouble reading and getting through it, and at one point the cat intervened and knocked the whole thing over and down. At least I'm still kind of getting it down. Maybe in the future it'll be interesting for my kids to listen to, if nothing else. I don't know what else to say other than that's all for now. Go with God.